Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Death of Death, where we proclaim Christ's victory over sin, death, and everything else. I'm your host, Nick Stewart. Today we have the long-awaited follow-up to last week's episode with Trevor Wright. I just want to take a brief moment to apologize for the quality of this portion of the podcast, because I'm still unpacking in our new home in Oklahoma. Haven't gotten my podcast equipment set up yet, so I am recording this on my iPhone. But you know what? I'm really pleased by the level of quality I'm getting even from this, so it's not that bad. Just a quick recap. Last week, Trevor told us about his history as a skeptic and how he ultimately found that although Christianity may not have every single answer you would ever, ask, it has the most important answers. But life as a Christian hasn't been easy for Trevor. He began working for a church, and some very bad things happened to him and a lot of people that are very close to him. So I'm going to give this disclaimer. If you're wondering what the point of this conversation is, or why I would ever put this on my podcast, there are many reasons, and I'm just going to try to explain. You're going to hear what some people may consider just a long piece of gossip, but it's not that. Corruption among pastoral leadership is an all too common experience, and we need to learn about it, learn from it, and learn how to spot it in the future. You'll hear Trevor say that he had to question himself whether he was doing the right thing by exposing this corruption, and my answer to that is a resounding yes, but the point of bringing that up at the start of the show is that predatory leadership has a way of making you feel like everything is okay. Even if you know it isn't, that type of leadership can make you feel like you're doing the wrong thing when you're doing the right thing. It can make you feel like you yourself have done something wrong. So I want anyone who hears this, who finds themselves in a similar situation with their pastors, to realize you're not doing anything wrong by holding pastors to the standard they're held to in Scripture, okay? If you're in this type of situation, please expose it, but expose it biblically. And so listen to this podcast. You're going to learn well from Trevor how he sought to go about it biblically. So maybe that will guide you in the direction you should go. Trevor, in fact, may not want you to do exactly what he did, but it's definitely a good place to start by learning from someone who went through this and sought to go through it biblically. So I'm also including a warning here at the outset. I hate the term trigger warning, but that's essentially what it is. Anyone listening who has suffered this type of abuse from church leadership should be aware that we're going to talk about it in detail. Also, if you've been a victim of any type of sexual abuse, this may also be hard for you to hear. We are not detailing any sexual acts in this podcast, but some inappropriate things are mentioned, and I don't want this podcast to ruin anyone's day. So if you've had these types of abuse in your life, you may want to tune in next week for the conclusion to Trevor's story when we're on to a new topic, because I want this podcast to be where you come to escape from horrible things and not have to have your day ruined by bringing up painful memories. So I think that's going to do it. Without further ado, we'll get into the podcast, and I hope that this is helpful and a good learning experience for anyone who's listening.
Yeah, I won't name any names or names of places, but
I'll do it in post.
Will you?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it actually went on for a lot longer than a lot of people know, because I knew things before they actually came to a place where, they had an effect, outside of just on me and my family.
Yeah.
But yeah, worked at a local church for almost 10 years, served in the youth ministry, spoke on retreats, taught the young adult ministry every week, and was the janitor. Although I called myself the maintenance manager. just so that I could have some self-esteem. Yeah.
I called you the Prince of Keys.
The Prince of Keys. Yes, that's where my carabiner key idea actually came from. But yeah, worked there for a long time. Obviously, got really close with everyone who served there, the head pastor, the youth pastor. And let's see, in 2018 is when everything kind of went down. So I got married in 2015, and a month before I got married in 2015 on March 21st, so a month before that, I learned that, and this is where it gets hard, not naming names and not revealing their relationship to me.
If you're uncomfortable, then
no,
we don't have to talk about
I'm not uncomfortable.
Okay.
There's a young lady in the church who confided in me and my wife that there was a situation with the youth pastor where 3 circumstances had taken place. She had often babysat for the youth pastor and his wife and would spend the night downstairs on the couch. And there were instances where the youth pastor had given her a shoulder massage and, moved her bra straps, and she would have to put them back up. There was instances where there were foot massages alone on that couch downstairs that turned into calf massages, which turned into high thigh massages that turned into her having to say stop and him not going any higher. And there was another circumstance where there was a hug and it was inappropriate. And so that all came to me a month before my wedding, at which this youth pastor was one of my best men. And for anybody listening or who has gone through that sort of a situation, it's very discombobulating when you've known this person for as long as you have. You've served with them. They have a wife, they have kids, and you thought you knew them really well and that they would never do something like that. And you would think that the most obvious course of action and what you would do in that situation is immediately confront, immediately bring that to attention. But you're caught up with the fact that you really also care about this person. You care about their wife. You care about their children. And you want to have some tact in how you go about bringing this forward, especially as someone who believes that even something like this could be forgiven and covered by the grace of God, not in concealing it, but in bringing restorative action to where you're still able to have a relationship with that person and God be glorified through that, because where else in the world would that ever take place outside of the grace and kindness of Jesus? Not to say that it doesn't happen, but it would be an opportunity to glorify God. I was not in that place. I was in the place of, I want to cancel the wedding. This is off. And my wife suggested, would it not speak a better word to them about our willingness and the willingness of this young lady to be reconciled and to still have a relationship in the future if we told them after the wedding that we knew about this prior to the wedding, we still had you be a part of, this significant day in our lives, so that might speak a better word to them about that's how much we're willing to work on this with you, that we knew about this prior to that big day and we still had you be a part of it, even though it tore us up inside. We thought that might speak to them towards maybe being truthful and accepting the consequences and going through all the proper steps to be reconciled. So that all happened, but then leading up to the wedding, I wasn't completely on board with that all the way. I was upset. It felt weird having him be a part of the wedding, but then that's when my wife said, it's me too, and it's the senior pastor. to which my heart just falls through, the bottom of the car as we're sitting outside of the pastor's house where she has lived for 7 years. And she says that, there's been circumstances with him where there have been inappropriate massages. There's been, hey, this is just between us. My wife wouldn't really understand our relationship. There were times where my wife let him know, the elders should know about what's taking place. And he used scare tactics like, if we do that, they're going to know that I was just trying to love you, and to be clear, there wasn't anything, and I feel weird even saying this, like sexually explicit in what was taking place. Yeah. It was just extremely inappropriate physical contact that never led to an actual sexual act or anything like that.
Yeah, but that's like Predator 101,
yeah, exactly.
Like his response.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it was probably something to the extent of like, you're going to get in trouble too.
Yeah.
For this,
Well, basically, you're going to come out about this and it's going to be really embarrassing for you and you're not going to really gain anything from it.
That lines up so well with everything we see on the news every day when things like this are exposed.
Yeah.
And
not to mention that he also, she lived with him and his wife and his kids for 7 years. She became known in the house as Auntie Cheryl. She was part of the family. And, there were 2 kids that she significantly helped raise within that house. And he used the scare tactic of, my wife would never let you see the kids again, if this was, brought out. So all of that was also known prior to my wedding day. And looking back, I kind of wish that I know that it would have been right for me to deal with it right away. But like I said, within that situation where there are children involved, there's wives involved that had nothing to do with the choices that these men had made. And you think about what kind of collateral damage is going to take place because you're bringing this to light, and it scares the crap out of you because you don't want those kids to be hurt by this. You want them to see their dad in the best light possible. And you don't want to bring those dark things of the world to bear upon those minds that had nothing to do with those actions. So
it reminds me, like, I think about Louis C.K. a lot, and the things that he did, were not as severe as some of the other people that we've heard about, but they needed to be called out.
Yeah.
But the things that I think about are like his 2 teenage daughters who now have to go to school with everyone knowing these intimate things about their dad that no one should know. How do you straddle the line of like, these things need to be called out, but I don't want to hurt the innocent people involved?
Yeah.
Because there always are.
Yeah. And then you throw into that the idea that you're not perfect as well. And that that you've done things in your life that you're not proud of. And you wonder whether or not what your inclinations are, in bringing something to light. Like, what about you? Like, you've done things like, and you start questioning whether or not you're a hypocrite for wanting to bring this to bear on this person. But, knowing that you have things that other people don't know about as well. And you wonder if the thing that this person did has gotten to the level that justifies you kind of, bringing that to light. And so it's just a very discombobulating situation. And for anybody listening that's ever thought like, oh, well, now they're bringing it up like 3 years after the fact. Really? Yeah, really. Because it's really taken them that long to process through the kind of damage that it's going to bring upon the people that they're bringing this to light on. Not to also mention the fact that this is an extremely personal thing for them that they're scared to death about bringing forward as well.
Yeah. I was in a situation where I became aware of an inappropriate thing like that, but it involved a married man that I didn't even know. And so I asked 5 people, tried to get like the most varying degrees of like beliefs and, temperament to get the most balanced answer. And 4 out of 5 said, find the wife, contact the wife, tell her what you know. And the 1 out of 5 that did not say that, it was very much along those lines. It was like, you have no idea what kind of Pandora's box this could open. And what if this somehow came back on you? And and it was scary to hear that. It didn't really change my mind at all, but I can see how, someone would have to think about that. Yeah, I mean, like he even brought up, like, what if there's a suicide as a result of this
Yep.
information coming out. And it's like, that would suck, but that still
Yep.
doesn't mean that I shouldn't say something.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
You want some coffee?
I'd love some. Yeah.
All right. So all this stuff comes out.
Yeah. So my wife and I know about 2 instances, one involving one of the young ladies who babysat for the youth minister, and then the other situation that involved my wife herself. Yeah. So there's another young lady that lived with my wife in the pastor's home, and just for a brief period of time, and her and the pastor did not meet eye to eye on a lot of things and argued a lot, and there was a lot of contention. And I think the worst thing about the whole situation is that our former pastor explicitly said that he wanted to be a father to my wife and to this other young lady, and used that kind of identity to do things that would have otherwise just been blatantly and obviously inappropriate. You know, you have an 18, 19-year-old young blonde girl who you've said you'd like to be the father to, and you can then justify spooning on a couch with them because you're being a father to them. You can give a massage to this 18, 19-year-old young, beautiful blonde girl with nobody else in the house, and there's no issue with that because you're being a father to them. To use that kind of place of power as a pastor to then also move into a fatherly role with them. My wife's dad had passed away from, cancer. They hadn't seen him since they were very young because he, did some things where he was incarcerated, and so my wife grew up, without a dad. And so for her to have this pastor who she's looked up to say, yes, it's okay to live in my house, and not only that, but I want to walk you down the aisle one day, I want to be like a father to you, entered into some very emotional places with her in conversations, and used that position to do some inappropriate, things that you would never do, never do with an 18 or 19-year-old young woman. I sit here today as a 32-year-old man with 2 kids, and, it was around my age that he had these 18, 19-year-old young girls move into his house. And I could never imagine doing that. And so,
well, you're a totally trustworthy person, but if there were 18 or 19-year-old girls moving into your house, I'd probably ask you what was up.
Yeah, I would hope you would. And there were people who challenged him on it too at the time.
Well,
and
basically,
basically they, from what I know, and I don't want to, that's the thing. Like in a situation like this, you only want to speak about what you know, because if they can latch onto one thing that you say that isn't for sure, that's what they will bring the most light to. And all the other things that you've said that have been appalling will get lost in that shadow because they will focus all their energy on, but you said this one thing and then you didn't know that it was true. How do we know all the other stuff you said wasn't
that's what
true?
They say about police interrogations. They say you can tell 9 complete truths, but then you accidentally go a little too far and say, I've never even been to Malibu. Yeah. But if they can prove you ever have been,
Oops,
the
you
whole
killed the
story,
guy.
the whole story's gone.
Yeah. So we get back from our honeymoon, and it's like, all right, stuff's gonna hit the fan. Like, we need to deal with this now. So we decided to deal with it in steps. The thought of bringing everything to light all at once was just a little bit too much for us at the time. We were scared. And so we actually, to see what he would do, we went to the senior pastor and we let him know about what had happened between the youth pastor and this other young lady with getting the thigh massage and, the massage with the removing of bra straps, all of that. And the response was, okay, this is going to be dealt with, but we have to be really careful about the way that we go about, dealing with this. There were things going on with C.J. Mahaney at the time and Sovereign Grace that I really don't know anything about. I never looked into it, but he brought up that stuff like that was going on at the time, and so we have to make sure we deal with this in the right way because I guess things weren't really dealt with in the right way in the other case. But then he followed it up with this, and he hasn't denied that he said this, but he said this is going to be dealt with, but however it's dealt with, you have to be okay with. And for two people that are completely scared about this being dealt with at all because of what this might cause to have happen in a church that, you feel loyal to and that you care about, and there's all these families that would be affected by this. Yeah, we were like, thank God, like it's going to be taken off of our plate. And, basically we didn't want to be in a place where justice was done to this person and come back with like, he didn't get it bad enough, sort of a thing. And so that's what it felt like. We never thought like that he would never tell any of the elders about what had taken place. We thought surely this is going to go to the elders and this is going to be dealt with. And when he said this is going to be dealt with, but you have to be okay with how it's dealt with, it was just like, yeah, we're not looking for a vendetta against this guy. We love him.
Public hanging.
Anything like that. Yeah. What the senior pastor did was basically, I won't get into what I think about what he did because that's what I think. I'll tell you what he did. He had that youth pastor and his wife meet up with this young lady alone to talk about what had taken place between the youth pastor and this young lady. And it was based off of what the young lady told me and my wife about this meeting. It was the youth pastor saying, I'm so sorry you took things this way. I'm so sorry, that, it came across that, there was something inappropriate going on. Basically, this is really all your fault in the way that you're seeing how things went down. He might not have meant it that way. I'll even give him that. But that's exactly how it feels to somebody who, came forward about all this and, basically is now feeling like, wow, I really made a big deal out of something that, I guess it was nothing. Like he's telling me this was nothing. The problem is that we learn later on that there were no specifics mentioned at all about what had actually taken place between him and this young lady while his wife was present. It was just kind of blanket statemented like, hey, you took a foot massage the wrong way. And that's all that was mentioned. Huh. And so the young lady is in the place of, really like all the weight of actually informing the wife of what actually took place between me and her husband. That's on me right now to tell her for the first time. And so she let us know that she walked away from that meeting feeling like his wife actually never even was informed about what had really taken place. So we find out about that. She lets us know that that's how the meeting happened. And we were told we had to be okay with however this was dealt with. And we agreed that we would be okay with however this was dealt with. Twisting us up further into a place of, but I'm not okay with how that was dealt with. But should I say that? Like, should I put his feet to the fire over this? I said I was going to be okay with how this was dealt with. Like, do I submit, like, in this situation? It's really confusing, especially after you thought that the weight of this was taken off of you. So, about 2.5 years pass, and I see that youth pastor, and I serve with him, and I'm preaching with him. And all the while I'm wondering, is it the Christian thing to just have grace and to let this sweep under the rug and go into the past and forget what, took place and just move forward, and he's turned over a new leaf and all that? All the while there were characteristics that I saw in him that were utterly un-Christ-like, and never looked up to him as somebody that I could say I follow after him as he follows after Christ, neither him or the senior pastor. And so all this bitterness is growing in me, over the years as I'm serving with them, knowing that the youth pastor did all these things and never really came clean about it to his wife and put this young lady in such a compromising position and left her with, unresolved emotional injury over what had taken place, to the point where her relationship with him and his family is never the same again. And senior pastor that I sit underneath every single Sunday, who I know decided that was the best way to deal with that, was to have her meet up alone, and then to check in with that pastor after the fact and be like, how could you have ever let this happen? How could you have ever been alone with her? How could you have ever, massaged her alone and all that stuff? Which is kind of ironic because he was doing all the same stuff with my wife and, another young lady. So 2.5 years pass, and I'm being considered for candidacy as an elder, and I'm going through the process at the church, and I'm now weighing myself against that kind of an office. And I'm finding that it's difficult for me to move into that place of being an elder and a pastor and being above reproach and all of these things, and really coming to think, not just, has my life actually been brought to a place where I can confidently move into this, but am I confident that moving into the future that I'm someone that can carry the weight of this office? And it was really rough for me. And what it came down to was, there's no way I could bear this if I can't call out these two men on what's taken place. If I can't do that, then there's no way that I can move into this office. I would be a charlatan. And so I ended up, confiding in one of the sitting elders at the time, that I know that, something's going on and all that, and not, to pass the buck to him. I wanted him to know, like, I am going to be, calling them out. I am going to be talking with them, and I just need somebody to know that this is going on, so that you could be praying for me and my wife as we go through this. And so one night I texted the senior pastor and the youth pastor, and I said, there's something that I really need to talk with both of you about. Can we meet at the church after hours, on this day? So we met up at 7:30 at the church, and I had a full text written out about why I was about to do what I was about to do. And ultimately it came down to Matthew chapter 5, the Lord's Prayer, and hallowed be his name. And it was titled, Hallowed be his name no matter what. And it was basically the idea that no matter what you find to be right, you should never not do that, because it might cause a lot of other bad things to happen. That if you know something to be true and to be good and to be right, you trust the consequences to the God who's in control of those consequences. And I was explicit in letting them both know that I loved them and I cared about them, and that I had no hope, but that the consequences from all of this was that they would be closer to Christ and I would be closer to Christ. But nevertheless, I turned to and I said, what happened with you? And we'll call her Stacy. And at that point, the lies started, where a massage took place, but it was only a foot massage. Let him know that isn't what was being told to me from the young lady. And long story short, the end of that conversation was, all I can say is that what you've painted of what's taken place is not what she's saying. And she is not confident that your wife knows anything about what actually took place. And what's really ironic about it is it was the senior pastor's last idea after he had gotten up to go to the bathroom in the middle of all of this casually and came back and said, we have to have here. We have to know that she actually knows what took place. So a second meeting was scheduled where it was me, the youth pastor, senior pastor, who is somebody who had done things as well. And I could only imagine what was going through his mind while I was like sitting with him talking with this other guy about all this other stuff. But
and then the youth pastor's wife had to be there.
This meeting? Yes, for this meeting, the youth pastor's wife was there. And I just wanted to ask her, before any talking started, I just wanted to ask her, did you know that there were 3 instances at the time that you met with this young lady, Stacy, and the youth and your husband? Did you know about the 3 instances? Because the youth pastor had said emphatically that she did know at that time, that he had let her know. And so the answer to that question was really important to me. And thankfully she answered honestly and said, no, at the time of the meeting, I did not know the 3 circumstances that had taken place with the massage on the leg and the massage of the shoulders and the bra strap and all that stuff. And I looked at the senior pastor and I was just like, done deal, right? Like he lied about this. I learned that there's no done deals. Once you
No done deals until the deals are all done.
Yeah. And so, there were lies on the side of that youth pastor about what that massage was. At first it was just a foot massage, then it was a massage that definitely didn't go above the knee. And then it turned into like, yes, it went above the knee. And, anybody who's like anybody worth their weight in investigative, prowess knows that like if you keep getting closer and closer to what the actual story is from the young lady, like you're realizing that the disparity between what you're saying and she's saying is leaving the people with the option of either you're outright lying or she's outright lying. And then you have to think about the motives of what would cause this person to outright lie and what would cause this person to outright lie. And once you realize that there's nothing over here for this young lady to gain in bringing all of this about, unless it's just true, you have to get closer and closer to what she's actually saying so that there's just enough fuzziness there for you to, say like she just took that the wrong way. So went from her saying it was something that got a couple inches away from my crotch, and him saying it was just a foot massage, to him saying, well, I, started rubber calf, and then finally saying, well, no, like I went just above her knee. Just above her knee? Okay, well, that could feel a couple inches away, and maybe she's just wrong about that. So there we go with that one. But the wife of the youth pastor did not know about the circumstances at the time of the meeting. And sadly, after all of this, it took other young ladies coming forward that lived in the house with this youth pastor to get him to admit that not only had those things taken place, the massage with the bra strap, his story about that was, well, I was giving her a shoulder massage and I noticed every time I hit her bra strap, she would kind of like jerk and it was bugging her. So I just moved it out of the way because I thought it was just bugging her.
So he's actually a hero.
He's really a hero. He was a hero in that one. And his story is that there was another young lady across the table who kind of gave a weird look at that. And he realized, oh yeah, that's probably inappropriate, and put her bra strap back up. But the story of Stacy, this young lady, is that the other girl was asleep on the couch in their living room while she was trying to do some paperwork at the kitchen table. So, a little different.
Yeah. So you're now an elder candidate, or you're being considered for an elder candidacy.
Yeah, at this time.
Yeah. And now things are getting heated between you and the other sitting elders. Not all of them.
Yeah, the other elders at this point have not found out. I've just, took, I wanted to do this as biblically as I thought was possible, and that was to confront the person that had done the wrong face to face first and see what the reaction was going to be. When I saw that the lines weren't going to match up between his story and that, I said at the end of that meeting with the youth pastor's wife and the youth pastor and the senior pastor, I said, I think this is an elder issue, and I think it needs to go before the board of elders. What do you guys think about that? And it was just complete silence in the room. And the first person to speak up was the youth pastor's wife. And this was around the time of the Me Too movement really taking charge. And her response was, I don't think that's necessary. If this gets out, everybody's going to think my husband's a monster. Like, he's not a monster. Like, he didn't intend any of this, or, and all of that. And, I responded to her, like, senior pastor's there, and I responded to this woman, and a whole lot of pain. Like, I'm one of her best friends we've worked side by side for almost 10 years. And I said, I completely understand your concern, and I don't want this man to be painted as a monster. We're all sinners. We all fall short of the glory of God. Nevertheless, the role of a pastor is a public one, and you go into this knowing that if you were to fall in this way, there's real repercussions for this that are often public. And I don't wish this on anybody, and I don't want this on, a guy who I've been best friends with for so long. But I responded to that, and then it was just silence. And I turned to the senior pastor and I said, what do you think about like this? And I said, is this an elder issue? And he said, I don't know.
I don't know.
What do you know?
And I said, well, then it has to be. because you can't leave this one
you
to
can't just
chance.
not know.
You can't just not.
Yeah.
So after that second meeting with the youth pastor and his wife and the senior pastor, I turned to the senior pastor and I said, "Can we talk really quick?" And that's where we went into his private office, and I said, my wife has shared that there's actually potentially been some compromising physical situations between you and her as well. And he said, I've always loved her, and I've always wanted to be a father to her, and she's like family. She's like family to us, and anything that I've done, it was just trying to be a good father to her. Like, you don't know how confusing that is, being in a house with someone who's lost their father from cancer, and you see them crying, and so you want to hug them, you want to comfort them, and always towing the line between what's appropriate and what's not. And even now, hearing myself talk, I'm starting to sympathize with that. I can see that that's kind of confusing if it had only happened once or twice. But when it was a consistent physical pattern, that's strange. That's when you were trying to toe that line, and you should have known as a pastor in the church that the moment you considered how to toe that line, realized that shouldn't be a situation that you put yourself in, and you shouldn't have had the young lady living in your house, like so many people had told you that you ought not to have had that young lady living in your house. And when it gets to the point where the kind of relationship you've had with her is a special one that no one else would get, that you have told her wouldn't be a good idea to bring up with your wife, when those moments of being a father in quotations are always done away from the presence of anybody else that would have seen what was going on, that's when the sympathy kind of stops. But in that moment, when I confronted him for the first time, it was really confusing for me. Then I went home and I told my wife how that went, and she just broke down in tears, and she sobbed. And what I said next to her was, "You have to tell me everything." And I said, "Is there more?" And she said, "Yes." And there was another situation where it was just explicitly clear this was not a fatherly moment. And that's when I said, "You know what, I texted the senior pastor and I said, "You know what, we need to meet up. There's more about what's taken place with you and my wife that we really need to talk about." And he replied, "Fine." So we met up at the church again at 7:30, and my wife actually came to that one. And that's the meeting at the end of which I said, "What's gone on between you and my wife and this other woman that you met up with for a counseling session in the middle of the night, as well as two other women. I won't go into all their stories just for the sake of time. It's going to be brought forward before the elder board." And that's when he responded to me and said, "You don't know what kind of things this is going to bring up with the other elders. I know things that you don't, and you don't know what this is going to cause." And my response to that was, if this is going to bring up things that, if they had been done while they were pastors and elders, would have been disqualifying, then all the more reason for them to finally come up.
Yeah.
And he said, "I don't agree. I don't agree."
I bet you don't.
And
yeah.
And so I left the room, and he said, "I'll call the meeting." And 2 days went by, and the elder that I had confided in, I said, he said he was going to call the meeting, and that elder decided that he was going to confront him. He let him know that he knew everything, and kind of took the lead on starting what would be a 3-month plus process of elder meetings that in the beginning I was a part of, but then I was told, since I wasn't an elder yet, I was just a candidate, that I would not be allowed in the room, as well as because what had taken place involved my wife, and I was compromised in looking at things objectively because my wife was a part of it. But the first meeting was without the senior pastor or the youth pastor there, and it was just the other elders, and it was my wife telling her story, and there wasn't a dry eye from any of the elders. I get choked up just thinking about their response, because I was actually given hope, like in that moment, like, okay, we did the right thing. Like, this is actually going to be for the good, and this is a really hard emotional moment for everybody, but something good is going to come out of this. But then when we were all in the same room with that senior pastor and his wife, and my wife, they heard his side of it. And after my wife described what had taken place between her and the senior pastor in the room full of men, because of what had taken place in her past with her dad, there was physical abuse. And the first thing that was said to her after she had read what had taken place was by one of the other elders. And it was, do you think because of your past you saw things that were done to you in a certain light that you wouldn't have seen them in if those things hadn't happened? Basically psychologized the abuse that took place as, this is all just because of your point of view. Gave you a hug and you took it as a sexual advance. It's hard to justify. So if
it was clear at that moment how things were going to go.
Yeah, if I shook your hand, or if we were praying in a circle and we, grabbed hands, right?
Yeah.
If I gave you a little hand squeeze at the end of it, and you took that as me coming on to you,
I have before.
That's one thing. Yeah. That's perception, right? Mm-hmm. Like, my perception was just like hand squeeze. Like, that's what we do at the end of a prayer, right? Yeah. If you took that as a sexual advance, I would say, like, I did not mean it that way or anything like that. If I, did a hand squeeze and then grabbed your tush and squeezed on and said, that's awesome. Like, there's a little bit less of, like, you can't perceive whether or not I grabbed your rear end. You can't perceive that it either happened or it didn't.
Or whether it was a fatherly rear end grab.
Yeah, you can perceive the intention of something, but you can't perceive whether or not that thing actually took place. So a hand squeeze, that took place. You can't perceive whether or not that took place. And so the narrative that grew out of all of this was perception versus reality. Things were perceived to have been a certain way that weren't actually the reality of it. And what it came down to is, were there things done that, whether or not they were perceived as sexual or not, were nevertheless, in every situation, inappropriate? And in anybody's estimation, when you ask them, like, what if you did this to a 19-year-old young blonde girl? Would that be okay for you in any situation? It was like, no, not if I did it. But you get into this room where this guy is saying, I was trying to do it out of love and all of that. I was just trying to be a father. And all of a sudden it can be justified because the intention of it. The question is whether or not a thing can be done with all the best intentions in the world and that thing just be off limits. You should have never done that thing. Like punching my son in the face. I could say, well, he was doing something he shouldn't have done and it was my intention to just make sure he didn't touch the light socket. It doesn't matter. You shouldn't punch your son in the face. That's always wrong no matter what the circumstance. And, there were things that were wrong no matter the circumstance. Yeah. Not the least of which being what was admitted to. And that was him. If you just take this first case of the young lady and the youth pastor, he didn't take that to the elder board. What kind of pastor doesn't take that situation to his elder board and then have that youth pastor continue without any break in his ministry? That alone, he admitted to. Only he admits to it by saying, I definitely did the wrong thing. I should have never, handled it in that way. And I've wondered whether or not I handled that the right way. And I mean, that is a moral failure that I believe warrants disqualification. Mm-hmm. You put so many more people at risk in those 3 years, young ladies at risk, that this youth pastor, to this day, there could be young girls that just haven't come forward about it because they don't want the trouble of it.
I was a youth leader in that same youth group for 2 years, and there were times when I would show up to something and it's like, was she here first? Like, was she here before anyone else got here? Like, and so that's made me wonder about things,
Especially when
Him
the
and I-
rule has been pounded into you that you're never alone
Yeah.
with a young lady.
Yeah, I mean, and like, this is kind of here nor there, but in those like training sessions, it would literally be said, make sure you are never ever alone with one of the kids. But pick your kid up from school and grab
The
some
fun-
coffee
no
and
purple.
hang. Yeah,
No purple,
yeah,
right?
yeah, no purple.
Blue with blue,
yeah,
red with pink with pink,
pink with pink.
never blue
yeah.
with pink, never purple.
Yeah. But go ahead and pick them up from school and have coffee with them and hang out with them and get to know them. But never ever be alone with them. It was like such a conflicting message.
Yeah. If you're
from the
discipling,
beginning.
you're allowed to hold hands.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Everyone knows that.
Yeah.
Okay,
So meetings continue
meetings
to
are
take
continuing.
place.
Now the elders are involved.
Now the elders are involved.
There's 2 or 3 that are on your side, from what I remember.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. But slowly got to this weird place where the definition of grace became, you
could never fire a pastor.
You never fire a pastor. And, at most you give 6 months of leave with pay and teach them how to write a sermon better, which is what happened.
I know.
So,
although that needed to be done.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
The
Still,
sermons
I think
needed
needs
to be done. Yeah,
Anyway,
for sure.
But yeah, 3 months of hell where the victim that came forward, my wife, was not met with to be counseled or to be consoled. I confronted 2 of the elders on that came to our house where we were living, and I said, where's been the care for my wife? There was care for the youth pastor and his wife, and for the senior pastor and his wife, and the response from one of the elders was like, do you want us to send his wife to counsel you? Basically, like, who's available right now? Like, you've caused all this big issue. Like, everybody needs counseling right now. In that same meeting, it was basically like, do you know how hard it's been on all of our families? With this, going, like, can't you guys have more grace, with what's going on? And it was just like, it put us in a place where it's just like, yeah, we kind of feel like pretty crappy right now. And in that meeting, it was also made clear, a verse was quoted to us from, I think it was Proverbs. I'm not really sure, but it's basically 7 things are listed that are an abomination to the Lord, the last of which is causing dissension between brothers. And it was made very clear after he read that, he looked at me and said, there's 7 things listed, and according to 7 being the complete number, the last thing is the most appalling to God, that you would be causing dissension between brothers. And I was left like, are you saying like us coming forward about it, like we're sinning, like this is like, and it wasn't
the
outright
inappropriate behavior that caused the dissension.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't like outright said. It basically put us in enough of a shaky position where it was just like, it left us again wondering, like, are we doing what's right? Are we the bad guys in this right now by asking for justice to be done? Because it got to the point with the youth pastor where him just saying like, yeah, I realized what I did with that young lady, the thigh massage and all that, which he eventually admitted to. Like, the thigh massage took place. He was still fuzzy on the bra strap and all that. But, got to a place where it was just like, I can't believe I put myself in that position. To which one of the elders said, you can't do this. Like, and we hope that you've, learned from this. Like, you can't, put yourself in those situations. And it was just like a very contrite, like, yes, I have. I had. To which it went silent. I was just like, this isn't how this goes. Like, it isn't like you shouldn't have done this and that's that. Like, this is
bad.
Bad pastor. Like, this is disqualifying. This is, you don't look at that guy and say like, yeah, like, here's a book, read it and don't do this again. Paul Tripp will make sure that you're, a good pastor again. Like, no, like, you lose your office at the, you no longer fit the qualifications that are listed out in 1st, 2nd Timothy and Titus. Like, it isn't like, the pirates code where it's like, they're more like guidelines, like it's like you either, the way that, and this was really great. In one of the elder meetings, I was saying, like, these are the qualifications and all that, and this is how we should deal with it. One of the pastors, like, what you're talking about isn't the word of God. And what I was saying should happen, he was basically saying my word wasn't the word of God. And I was like, that may be true, but I did just quote verbatim the book that you had me read in order to be entered into eldership at your church. And he just went, fair enough. Basically, like, I'm just holding you guys to the standard that you yourself have said that is the biblical standard, and there's Biblical Eldership by Strauch, kind of the go-to book for evangelical churches. But yeah, even after the youth pastor said, yeah, there was a thigh massage and nobody else was around, and yeah, I removed the bra strap, but it was just because it was bugging her a little bit. Like, that it wasn't going to be dealt with. And that's when, I think I already alluded to some other young ladies coming forward, that it basically came out that and to his credit, the youth pastor did not have to admit that there was something else that nobody knew about, but there were sexual relations that had happened outside of his marriage, and he confessed to it, and before the entire church confessed it, to his credit.
I respect that.
He did not completely confess to his intentions with the young lady that first came forward. He did do what was necessary to be removed from his pastoral role. The senior pastor kept denying things had taken place. Eventually said that he got a lie detector test. The questions,
which is worth nothing.
The question exactly. Yeah. The questions that were asked of him in that lie detector test were never disclosed. Mm-hmm. All that was said was that he took a lie detector test and that he passed with flying colors 3 straight times. And he got
they put a stud finder up to his chest.
Yeah.
Like, did you do it?
Yeah.
It didn't beep.
Yeah. No, I mean, his dad works with the sheriff, so I'm sure there was some legitimacy with it, but you also have to understand his father works for the sheriff. And, as I said, the questions were not disclosed that were asked of him. But I do hear that to this day he has that passing lie detector test hanging on his fridge at home as an A+. Wow. So, yeah.
Next to little Billy's drawings.
Yeah. So
proud of Dad.
Well, but then think about what kind of situation that puts my wife in and all the other young ladies. Like, and I said, like, do they get to take a lie detector test? And basically it was said to us, they're welcome to. It's like, really, you're going to put these young ladies who are victims into a situation where they're going to take a test that's fallible in order to correct, like 4 different women all saying that inappropriate things have taken place. And I asked one of the elders one time, like, what if more women came forward? And they said, well, we'd have to reassess things. And I was like, would 7 do it? Like why is 4 not enough? And
I counted at least 7 when all was said and done. I think I lost track at 7. So.
Yeah, they came down on a verse in, I believe it's 1 Timothy, that basically says that a charge should only be brought against an elder if there's 2 or 3 witnesses to corroborate. To which I said, if that's the case, then one would have to be a pretty, not saying that rape is what took place in these circumstances, but, a pastor could be a serial rapist and have 100 women that come forward, and all of it, I mean, unless he's just raping people out in broad daylight for 2 or 3 people to see, you could always keep that concealed and a charge could never be brought against you. And that's the absurdity of that interpretation.
They're saying there needs to be 2 or 3 witnesses for each event.
Event.
I think, upwards of 4 to 7 witnesses of a pattern is totally fulfilling of
And I think
that
that's also what's
standard.
used in actually corroborating whether or not somebody has the character to be in a pastoral role. You have to have witnesses within their lives that say, yes, his character testifies to that. Now, 4, 5, 6, 7 women come forward saying this pattern has been here in this way and that way, and what's left is we can't, even if that's all true, we can't really do anything about it because there weren't 2 or 3 witnesses at that event. nobody's giving high thigh massages with, at the church potluck, probably.
Although now nothing would surprise me.
Yeah, nothing would surprise me at this point. But anyhow, so those conversations are all going on. I'm brought into those conversations in and off again, and it's in the midst of all of this that I suddenly start having excruciating abdominal pain, which I later found out was not constipation, but a cancerous tumor that had formed within my colon.
All right, everyone, that is going to do it for this week. Once again, we have to cut it off at the most exciting part because it's too long for 1 week's episode. But next week, we are going to finally get the conclusion to Trevor's story, and he's going to tell us all about his journey with cancer and what God has done through that. And also, if you're leaving this episode feeling a little unsatisfied with where the conversation on church leadership corruption went, you will be pleased to know that we kind of wrap that up in part 3 as well. Not to say that, this conversation had no point. You might feel like we didn't have like a theologically centric conversation on that topic. Well, we are going to have at least a mention of that next week. So hopefully that will scratch any itch that you are left with this week. And I cannot wait for you guys to hear next week's episode. So that's going to do it. That's going to do it for this episode. I've been your host, Nick, here to tell you that you are not doing the wrong thing by exposing pastoral corruption. And if you're as committed to proclaiming Christ's victory as I am, I'll be here to do it with you all again next week. Goodbye for now.